هنا في كل مكان اهلا ومرحبا بكم. احنا معكم النهارده داخل سفارة البرازيل. لقائنا اليوم مع سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية. هنتحدث مع سعادة السفير عن دولة البرازيل وعن الشعب البرازيلي، فابقوا معنا وتابعونا. في كل مكان بيسعدنا ان يكون في ضيافتنا اليوم سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية. Your Excellency, it's an honor to have you and thank you for this meeting.
My pleasure to be here with you, Sarah.
At the beginning, I would like to know from Your Excellency the diplomatic background of Your Excellency before coming here to Egypt. How it was?
Well, I've been a diplomat now for more than 40 years, so it's a long career, and I've served in several bilateral and multilateral posts. Multilateral means United Nations headquarters, so both in New York and Geneva. I was ambassador to the United Nations in New York from 2013 to 16. I was also ambassador to the United States for 3 years under the second Lula government. You know that we've just re-elected President Lula, and he just took office on the 1st of January. And before coming to Egypt, I was ambassador to Italy in Rome. So I've only been to places very influential internationally and high places of culture, as you can see.
One of the things I would like to ask about is your being the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Brazilian Minister of Foreign Affairs for some time. What did it add to your diplomatic career?
Well, in Brazil, we have a similar diplomatic culture as you do here in Egypt. So very often the Minister of Foreign Affairs is a career diplomat, an ambassador, just as you have Minister Sameh Shukri, who was previously ambassador to the United States. Myself also, I had always been a career diplomat, so it was the biggest honor for me to be invited by President Dilma Rousseff, who was our first and only so far female president, to assume the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from January 2011. I was minister for 2 years and 8 months. During that period, I traveled the world extensively, received many foreign ministers, and participated also in presidential visits abroad and in receiving guests in Brazil. One very important event that coincided with that period was the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, the Rio +20 conference that took place in 2012. So it was a very varied and lively period. I also visited Egypt as foreign minister when I was received here by Minister El-Arabi, Nabil El-Arabi.
Yes, that's good. Can we talk more about the Brazilians and the Brazilians people also? So I would like to start with Your Excellency by talking about the geographic nature of Brazil and the natural resources that the country have already.
Yes, well, Brazil, you know, sometimes I say that just as Egypt is a historic powerhouse because you have 7,000 years of recorded history, maybe Brazil can be considered a geographic country, a country of geographic importance internationally. We are 8 times larger than Egypt. We have a population that is more or less twice the size of Egypt, so a smaller density of population. Egypt and Brazil have the 2 longest rivers in the world. You have the Nile, we have the Amazon. The difference is that the Amazon has actually more water. So Brazil is a country with very abundant water resources, with several river systems. There are many mineral resources. I've also discovered oil recently along our coast. But more recently, Brazil has really become noteworthy and well known internationally for having become an agricultural powerhouse. So we are #1 producer and exporter of beef, #1 exporter of soya, several other products where we are very competitive, including corn, sugar, orange juice. Egypt is a large producer of oranges, but we are #1 exporter of orange juice. So these are some of our strengths, but I would say that we also distinguish ourselves from being in a very peaceful region of the world. So Brazil has 10 neighbors. We border on 10 different countries, and we haven't had any difficulties or conflicts with any of these neighbors for more than 150 years. This is, I think, a very important trait that establishes Brazil as a voice for peace internationally.
Also, Your Excellency, Brazilian is considered as the most important touristic destinations in the whole world. Can you tell me what distinguishes tourism field in Brazil?
Well, actually, this is not entirely true. Egypt receives many more tourists than Brazil does. In fact, more or less double. So in a very good year, Egypt can receive more than 12 million tourists, up to 14 million. And in Brazil, we receive more or less half that number. Probably because we haven't invested as much in the touristic industry. Also, we are comparatively more distant from some of the Northern Hemisphere developed societies that invest and that spend quite a bit on tourism. But still, I would highlight that Brazil is an extraordinary tourist destination with 8,000 kilometers of seacoast, most of it bathed by very warm waters, beautiful beaches, the Amazon forest, beautiful sceneries, and many cities of historic relevance with colonial architecture, as well as some large cosmopolitan cities. São Paulo, for example, is a city that resembles Cairo in many respects. It's a mega city of a bit less than 20 million inhabitants, but with communities that come from all parts of the world. We have Italian descendants, Japanese descendants, Arab descendants. Brazil has the largest diaspora of Arab descendants outside the Arab world, mostly Lebanese and Syrian immigrants who came about 100 years ago.
That takes me to talk about the Brazilian citizens, the people themselves. Can you please tell us about their traditions and customs and the way they live the life?
Well, Brazil has a population of about 210 million people. We are the only country in the Americas to speak Portuguese because we were colonized by Portugal. So this establishes a unique identity. To simplify, I think the Brazilian population has been very much the product of the intermarriage and the cultural influence of three large groups. The indigenous population that lived in the Americas before the European navigations in the 16th century when the Portuguese arrived on our coasts. The European migrants, mostly Iberian, Portuguese, Spanish, but also from Northern Europe and other parts, including Eastern Europe. And the African element, because Brazil has had a position which we are not at all proud of, which was the one that we were the last country to abolish slavery and had a very large population of African slaves. But the good side of this story is that the African element in our identity today is prized by the nation as a whole. So it would be inconceivable to speak of Brazil without giving importance to the many contributions that were made by Brazilians of African descent, whether in sports. Many of you have heard of Pelé, who just passed away last year, was considered the most famous football player in the world. In music, in many other domains of our society. We have yet to promote a more equal society in many respects, but I am very encouraged by the current government that has created a ministry to promote racial equality. In addition to these elements, I think we should also highlight the contribution made by other groups. I mentioned the Arabs, the Japanese. There have been migrants from practically all parts of the world in Brazil.
Your Excellency, please allow me to go back to speak about the sport, especially the football, because it's one of the major things that all the world really are looking for, the Brazilian team and the samba, and the way they really act inside the field. It makes me wonder, does it have something to do with the people, their characters, their raising? How did you do this in sport? Why do you like sport like this, and how can you really adjust people or citizen to have just or such as a talented young men in a sport like football?
Well, you know, I can give you my personal interpretation because I don't think there's a scientific explanation. I think this mosaic of our human landscape with people from so many parts of the world has contributed to create a very diverse and unique identity in Brazil. And football sports is maybe the most democratic form of interaction that you have in any place, because people from all backgrounds, from all levels of society can play together, can participate. In Brazil, enthusiasm for football has become a trademark of the country. We are the only country in the world that has 5 World Cup titles. So we're very proud of this distinction. Unfortunately, at the last World Cup, FIFA World Cup in Qatar, we were eliminated before the semifinals by the Croatian team, who did a very good job. But it was a fantastic World Cup, I have to say. The first one in the Arab world, I understand, and with fabulous games that all of us enjoyed watching. And I must congratulate Argentina for having been the champion. I think we all agree that they did a great job, and Lionel Messi now stands as one of the greatest players worldwide. But you know, the football culture is very deeply ingrained in our society and the country, north, south, east, west, in all different segments of society. Something that is very common in Brazil and that I haven't seen in too many countries is when you go to a beach resort, for example, during the day or sometimes at the end of the afternoon when the sun is not so hot, you can see young people playing football at the beach. People of all backgrounds, you know, the people who are the sons of the families with beautiful houses, the people who work in supermarkets, the people who are part of the fisherman community. This is, I think, a beautiful aspect of the democratic nature of sports in Brazil. And we hope that it will remain this way, and who knows, maybe at the next World Cup, Egypt will also be qualified, because you have fantastic players like Mo Salah that are admired around the world also.
Thank you, we hope so. I can also, we talk about the women, but here, I would like here to know more about the women rules in Brazil, how it is now.
Well, women play an important role in any society, I would say. They're half the humanity. And I worked for a female president, and I worked for female ambassadors. The diplomatic career in Brazil is one that is quite open and welcoming to female participation. With the new government that has taken office on the 1st of January, special emphasis is going to be placed on the advancement of women in society. A ministry has been recreated to promote gender equality and the advancement of women. I can say that in my own profession, this is now translating into women occupying more important positions. The deputy foreign minister in our ministry now is a female of African descent, which is a historic first for Brazil. Our ambassador to the United States will be a female ambassador, also for the first time. So these are examples of some of the conquests that women in diplomacy, but that also can be mentioned in other sectors of society. At the same time, I think we need to do much better in the political department, because we have a relatively low proportion of female parliamentarians in our Congress. You have a benchmark of 25%, I believe, here in Egypt. And in Brazil, we don't have a law that establishes a minimum, but the percentage has not gone above 15% in the recent past. At the same time, there are many female ministers that were appointed by the current government, the Lula government, and that are handling different portfolios. The planning portfolio, for example, Here you have Minister Hala Said, and we have Minister Monica Tebet, who is actually of Lebanese origin. You also have women occupying the Ministry for the Promotion of Racial Equality that I mentioned, and other portfolios. Overall in society, opportunities are open for women in many, many different professions. I would say that Brazilian women have established themselves as pillars of the Brazilian society, and I can only hope that this will continue and will become a more pronounced trait for Brazil in the coming years.
Excellent. Do you see any similarity between the Egyptians, for example, and the Brazilian people in the living, on the family rules and manners or things like this? Do you see any kind of similarity?
I do see many similarities. In fact, I felt very much at home when I arrived in Egypt, very welcome, and you are a country of very generous hospitality. I think Egyptians are very sociable. They enjoy interacting with people of different nationalities also, which is something that Brazilians also enjoy. The communication between Brazilians and Egyptians, although there is a language barrier sometimes, very often, is relatively easy. We are football-loving nations. We are nations that love music, that love art. We are also very sunny countries, so you know there's this kind of love of the outdoors, and that distinguishes both our peoples. At the same time, there are very significant differences. I would say that one of the most significant differences is the fact that you are predominantly an Islamic country, and Islam establishes very precise, specific traditions and behavior that we do not share in the Americas and we do not share in Brazil. And Catholic religion is predominant, but there are many other faiths, including Islamic, Jewish. There's a strong influence of African traditions that have found themselves also into spiritual practices in Brazil. So I would point this out as one of the most important traits where we differ. Otherwise, I think we have a very similar kind of wavelength, to use an American expression.
That's very good. Your Excellency, we will, of course, would like to talk more about the historical relation between Egypt and Brazil, but please allow me to have this in another episode. Now, thank you so much for having us and talking more about the Brazil and the Brazilian people. And it was an honor having you with us today. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
مشاهدينا في كل مكان، احنا انتهينا معاكم النهارده في الحديث عن دولة البرازيل كدولة وكشعب، واتكلمنا عن الرياضة، لان طبعا عارفة ان كل المصريين بيحبوا كرة القدم والفريق البرازيلي تحديدا وكل نجومه. لكن بالتأكيد للحوار بقية في حلقات قادمة إن شاء الله. هنتكلم عن العلاقات المصرية البرازيلية. اسمحوا لي اني مرة تانية اشكر سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا، سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية، واتمنى لكم كل التوفيق، وان شاء الله نتابع مع بعض الحلقة القادمة العلاقات المصرية البرازيلية. شكرا لكم والى اللقاء.